Darrell, it's great to have you with us, and I suppose what I wanted to do today really was get into some conversations around predominantly sort of the valuation of businesses, how you make decisions on what actually sets the value of a company, because obviously there's the standard things that some people know, which is obviously the assets that they've got and the stuff that we need to we need to do with regard to any due diligence, any kind of income they're generating and so on. But where do you guys, what is your sort of main focus when it comes to understanding that?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because when we get into diligence and we look at businesses, that we typically get asked what multiples are you going to pay for the business, because that's a well-trodden path in terms of how people value organizations, right? And so that you go, okay, that we have to make some consideration around that, but because we're slightly different as an acquirer, because we buy and hold forever, the fact is that we're not looking to put it into a fund and 10-year fund and look for an out in 8 years. So there's never going to be an exit strategy for us to realize a big number, so that if the business doesn't perform well. So the things we're looking when we look at valuations is that, having acquired circa 1,000 plus businesses worldwide under Constellation, is that we have a huge amount of benchmarking we can do. So we have a massive data set and knowledge around the group. So what we do is when we acquire a business, we look at the traits of the business, regardless of whether it's in a vertical we do or don't know, but there are lots of traits that you can overlay for different verticals. And then we pull on experience within the group and just say, okay, that if we're acquiring this business, is that we learn from our colleagues around the organization. So recurring revenues is one thing we look at in terms of the business, but as it's a buy and hold forever organization, is that it's not about making a quick buck. So that we have to look at the valuations of our businesses that enable us to say there's growth opportunity within this business. And so that how is the health of the business on a roll forward forever scenario, rather than that, just short term, we can sweat the assets. And the assets, normally when people sweat them, it is the cost control and that cutting it to the core, is that we actually look for investment in some of our businesses to grow them forever.
Right. Okay. And so it's more, you're not looking at like almost like a flipping kind of model. It's more a case of looking at stuff that's got long-term sustainability. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know it costs money to get customers, and you make money by keeping customers, right? And so that we're actually adding value to the customers long term. And so that's why if we know that there's going to be an investment needed for customer acquisition costs, and then we look at the lifetime value of that, and so that it's quite alien to some of our businesses that we acquire. They expect us to come in on day one and say, right, cut costs here, cut costs there. Whereas actually we say, do you know what, in some areas in your business, I need you to invest, because if we have this sustained forever approach, which is our mantra, then actually I don't want you to have a huge technical debt. So that we're always looking at the underlying health of the business, and so that is there enough investment going in to support refreshes of technology, the tech stacks. And so that we do quite a lot around the IT diligence of the business, just to make sure we know what we're walking into. And that comes into our valuation as well. So, you said, how do we look at the valuations of businesses? There's a number of facets that we have to factor in because of our buy and hold forever strategy.
Okay. And when you're looking at those, I mean, how big a part do the management team, the owners, the founders, and so on of that business play in that?
That's a big part for us, because and you're familiar with our model, Alex, is that we buy and hold forever, but it's very devolved, and so that we're very respectful for the organizations that we acquire, for them to keep the heritage. We like them to effectively keep the same brand and logo. So I'm not looking to acquire a business and get knee deep into that business. What I'm looking for is to acquire a management team who hopefully will stick around and stay with us, because that's what we're acquiring as well, is the knowledge of their business IP that's in their head and their customer relationships. And so that I'm looking to leverage them, and where we can overlay perhaps some of our best practices learned over the last 3 decades of buying and acquiring businesses, is that they can learn from us and we can learn from them. We always say is we learn about each other, but we learn from each other. So the management team is quite key in terms of our acquiring rationale, because what we want to do is coach and educate them about some of our best practices, and they coach and educate us about their customers and their verticals that they serve. And so hopefully that's a marriage that works very well on a go-forward basis.
Yes.
If you look around the group, I think the latest stat is that there's about 60% of all of the vendors that we acquired from are still within the organization somewhere. They may not be running their businesses. Similar to me is that they've grown within the group and traveled a different direction, so that, you know, 6 out of 10 isn't a bad strike rate in our
no, not at all. And so it's fair to say within that the human capital element is probably particularly is particularly strong as far as you guys are concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we go through diligence, it's a key thing that we like to understand is, one, the motivations of why they're actually looking to divest of their business or find an acquirer or a new home for it. And, you know, us as a forever home is usually a very good play because that we look after employees. But the human element is that we need to understand is that what are their aspirations. And it's not for everybody. As I said, you know, 6 out of 10 isn't bad strike rate, but then 4 out of 10 decide to say, okay, I want to go and sit on the beach. Or they might be serial entrepreneurs. We have had people say, okay, I want to go and travel a different journey. There's another interest over here. We go, great, that's fine. And so that we work with them, whatever journey they want to travel. Okay. So that if they want to stick around, that's great. How do we support them on their journey as they work with us, whether it's staying with that brand or taking on added responsibility as they grow through the organization? But if they decide to leave, that we're very conscious of the fact of saying, okay, what kind of people are the best fit to come in, you know? So we understand the senior management team and the employees, because what we don't want to do is just come in and think we know best, because we don't. We learn from every acquisition we acquire.
Yes, and I suppose in a lot of ways it wouldn't make much sense from a business point of view for you to come in and simply remove the management team and try to run a business yourself. Anyway, no matter, almost no matter how well you know it.
Yeah, and if you think the rate that we grow and we acquire businesses, that we don't have the bandwidth, and I mean that in the best will in the world, to be able to come in and just say that I want to come and meddle with this business. And, you know, a number of times is that we've invested in a business and we have the strategic rationale and our investment thesis, and that you know, we write all the time? No. Are we right most of the time? Yes, because we do a good job of diligence. However, there are occasions where you go, actually, after the event, there's things that didn't come out of diligence for whatever reason, right? We're all only human. And so that it's really interesting when we buy a business and they get into it, is the things we learn is just, it always fascinates me, and I go, that's a learning for me next time round when we go through an acquisition to turn over that rock or ask that question. And especially if it's in a similar vertical, because you have competing brands, and that educates me about the nuances within that vertical as well.
Okay, yeah, and do you often explore new verticals in that sense, or do you guys tend to stick with areas that you know better? I mean, how do you tend to decide which acquisitions are right for you and which ones aren't?
I think historically, when we first started, is obviously we wanted to build up our brain's trust, if you would, within a certain verticals, and there's a number of those we thought actually that these are good verticals to get into, and we started acquiring and buying competing brands within the same verticals. But having 1,000 businesses plus worldwide, is that you can imagine is that we're now into probably, if you name a vertical, we touch it somewhere, so that we're deep into most verticals. There's some that we've still yet to get heavy into. But I think that what we do is we look at each business, because of our devolved nature, on a standalone basis. So it has to be right for the portfolio, but ultimately it has it got the correct management team to drive it? Has it got the growth opportunity we believe to be sustained forever, for that buy and hold forever ethos? And so that Yeah, and that's why, we talk about valuations. It's very hard for us just to say this is our valuation criteria, because that we are very respectful to the brands we acquire, and also from the point of fact that they have to stand up under their own steam. So effectively is when I go and I'm doing the spiel, if you will, to acquire businesses. One of the things I say is that in the UK, it's like us buying a pub and we change the name of the licensee above the door. And effectively is that, if you're a privateer, we come with a financial strength to support the business forever.
But everything else effectively stays the same as far as all their customers are concerned, all of their employees and things like that are all concerned.
Yeah, and if you use the pub analogy, we say they're still serving the same beer. We might teach them a little bit how to clean their pipes a bit better, when they're going through that, but they've still got the same furniture. If they've got sticky carpets, might say, you might want to clean your carpets every month. So.
I see what you mean. Yeah, it's a good analogy. So
that's the analogy we use.
So obviously, when you're what are the things that are like sort of red flags within a valuation when you're looking at a company and you're looking at it for an acquisition and you perhaps don't go ahead? What are the sort of the general sort of main driving factors behind that?
Rather than red flags, I think it's just some things we've learned over the years, and so that obviously that we do most of our in-house diligence, but some of the things we look at quite heavily is the age of the tech stack and where they are. So how much technical debt, and I touched on that earlier. So if we going into an organization and all of a sudden the reason they're selling it is because they want a significant amount of money to rewrite the product, well, that's a big risk to us, right? So that if they have high attrition in their customer base, that tells me there's something wrong with the health of the organization in the customers. High attrition with employees, that's another thing. So that for me, I'm looking to buy stable, long stay organizations that have great relationships with their customers, that they're well known in the sector, and they look after employees. Now, if there's one or two of those that are amiss, and there's high customer attrition and high employee attrition, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to go, the first thing I do is say, what's the root cause of that? Is it management? Is it the sector? Whatever it may be, and is it fixable? And if it's not, then they are potential red flags for us going into an organization. And then the other thing is that I think it's just owners being realistic. The amount of times I go into potential deal negotiations and it's taken them 20 years to grow to a certain level, but then the next 2 years they're going to double or triple. Is that we're not wet behind the ears. We've been around the loop a few times, and that most of the organizations, they think if we just tell them we're going to grow that quick, then they'll believe it. Whereas actually we're going to do our diligence, and so we ask some searching questions from them to uncover that. And I think I'd much rather I went into an organization where I love growth opportunity businesses, but not unrealistic growth opportunities. So I think it's, people who are looking to divest their business or sell or find a new home, is just be respectful of the people acquiring the businesses. They've probably done it before, and so that we can spot those red herrings a mile off.
Yeah. And I mean, is it a fairly common thread for someone to overvalue their business then?
I don't know whether it's overvalued. The thing is that we go into conversations and negotiations without an emotional connection to a business. So if you've got somebody, it's been their life's work and they've been here 20, 30 years, I get it. I get the fact is they put a very high valuation on their business because of the emotional connection. And I respect that. But then we have to talk to them about the future journey it's going to go on, that we're going to look after employees, we're loyal to employees, that we're not going to trash their brand, is that we respect their brand. So there's a number of elements come into it, but it's not unusual for people not to overvalue their business, but to have a higher valuation expectation than us just because of that emotional connection, because we've not lived through the blood, sweat and tears and the sacrifices they've had to make to get to where they've got to. So I get it. But there is ordinarily a gap because of that emotional connection.
That makes sense. With one of the questions that comes that I suppose is quite relevant to the space that we're in terms of helping to grow startups, especially, is obviously unrealized value, and the sort of market opportunities that lay ahead of some of these companies. And obviously, from a simple numbers standpoint, unrealized value is non-existent. It isn't actually a value in the company. But there are companies and businesses that exist in a sector where they do have the ability to make large impacts on it, and do have the opportunity to make a significant growth path. Would that be something that you ever take into consideration, or are you guys more focused on the numbers to date? I mean, how do you tend to address that situation?
Yeah, and that's an interesting one, because again, the emotional connection, and people know that sector very well, is that sometimes we are slightly misaligned on the valuation of the business. And so we have mechanisms that we can share in the upside on a roll forward basis, where it's 2, 3, 4 years, almost like an earn out scenario. So if the vendors want to stick around, is that they should share in that upside. So we're looking to value the business on the performance where it is today. There's a consideration for the IP, and that acquiring that IP, because we're 100% ownership, we don't take part positions generally in organizations. And there might be a valuation on the table, but we have to value it on past performance and where it is today, and perhaps the forward-looking order book that we can see. But as you all know, Alex, is that sales pipeline, nobody can really forecast much past 6 months, right? Anything past that, it's just a wet finger in the air. And so that if there's a great growth opportunity with the organization, there's usually some kind of deal metric or a mechanism in terms of a deal shape we can put in place that will keep both sides motivated and aligned on a roll forward basis. And I think that's only us being realistic as well, because otherwise all the risk is on our side. You know, so we get, and I use this word carefully, naive vendors who come to us and say, yeah, great, Darrell, that my business is a £5 million turnover business now, but in 3 years' time, it's going to be 15 million turnover. I'm going to go, okay, I'll support that. You back yourself and I'll back myself with some kind of shape or mechanism we can work towards. But I'm not going to pay that today, because the risk is all mine. So that there needs to be a balance of the risk on their side and on ours.
Yes, that makes sense. And so, are you guys tending to find that, you know, within your sort of acquisition approaches, are you generally looking at businesses that have got a track record of success, or would a business that has had previous success but is now in a bit of difficulty be one that actually landed on your plate, and would be one that you took a look at for the opportunity of turning it around?
Yeah, and if you can imagine, I get all sorts of shape, size, and types of business come across my desk, and I can't really give an answer either way on that. Is that all I'd say is every opportunity that comes across the desk to me and my team, we take on face value, and we evaluate whether it's a sector we want to get into. We're already in it. Do we know something about it? What's the reason for the downturn? You can imagine, coming off the back of COVID, there's quite a few that came there. And it's interesting, we had a split. So some people that we were talking to through that decided to hold on to their business because they wanted to grow more value, to grow more valuation into their business to be acquired. Or other people just said, I've had so much hard times over the last 2 years, I appreciate there's a dip, and they know we're going to value it based off of trailing 2 or 3 years. And so that, you know, some people want to get out for whatever reason. So each one that we look at, respectfully, we take on its own merits, because each case is individual. So I can't say yes or no whether we would look at it, but it's on their own merits.
No, I understand. I just wondered if that was something that's generally within your strategy, or whether it's something that you tend to say, you know, we'll take a look at them on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and we do look at them on a case-by-case basis, because I said is that even though initially what you look at it is the values and the financial performance of the business, there's reasons behind those numbers, good and bad. Right? So that there may have been an event in the business, you know, so that there may have been 2 or 3 founders, and actually to find out one founder's left on his own because 2 have left, or there's been an unfortunate circumstance, whatever there may be. So that it's the big thing for me is understanding the story behind the numbers, the growth and the downturn, good and bad, and that usually then leads us to a situation, say, okay, now we understand it. What is our investment thesis on a go-forward basis for this business, and is it an opportunity to turn it around? Is it an opportunity to ride off the back of the growth, whatever that situation may be? And so we look at them on their individual merits.
No, fair enough. And are there sectors that you guys just don't want to touch at all, and for any particular reason?
From an ethical standpoint, is that I think I would be very cautious around gaming sectors, and also from adult industries.
Right. Yeah.
That I think I would be very careful around those if those opportunities came across my desk, because obviously that we've built up an amazing following for our brand and brand reputation. I wouldn't want to have anything that caused me potential to have damage against the brand. And
that makes sense.
Those are the only ones I think I would be wary around. So that if there's anything that's unethical, or I find is that actually it's not quite a fit, then that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what I sort of expected, that there's pretty much every business in your guys' sort of position. It has kind of not sort of necessarily sort of no-go areas, but industries that you tend to steer away from for obvious reasons, and obviously brand is at the end of the day has got to be the driving factor behind that, hasn't it? Because as you'll know, brand's everything at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I would say that those ones I've talked about are less favourable. The other ones, you have emerging technologies as well, and we see them all the time. But around certain green technologies and VR and AI. Is there emerging technologies, and do I want to be an early adopter? Again, on a case by case, but I probably want to wait and see how some of those emerging technologies play out in the marketplace. If I got too deep into them, I might dabble and dip my toe in the water. But again, it's I'd be on a case by case basis.
Yeah, so I suppose a good analogy there is that I think the AI, AR, VR space at the moment is looking quite a lot like the late 90s .com boom, isn't it? It's there's lots and lots of companies popping up doing it, and what will happen without almost any doubt is that there will be a retraction within the number of those over the course of the next decade or so, as they fail and as different ones sort of aggregate together, and so some succeed, some don't. There's particular areas where it works and where it doesn't. There'll be legislation that comes in almost definitely with relation to AI at some point, which will very possibly kill the business models of some of the ones that are already up and running. And so there's as you say, there's higher risk elements in that sector, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying is that I'm not a fan of it. Is I'm just waiting to see how it plays out, because I think AI is going to be an amazing thing for our industry, but on the basis, and I'll put this caveat in, that it's harnessed. Is perhaps the correct word.
Yes.
But I think the people who go in and adopt the technology blindly and they embed it deep into their solutions, I just think we've got to just harness it and make sure that it becomes a slave for us before we become a slave to it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, my view on it is like it's a tool at the end of the day, and how you use it is what matters. It's that's really what it comes down to. And I think there's a danger that a lot of people are going to abdicate responsibility to AI rather than delegate responsibility to it, and I'm certain that at some point or another there will undoubtedly be within the next few years some sort of legal case where a business did something, or a customer was served in a particular way, or dealt with in a particular way, or lost money in a particular way, or whatever it happens to be, where the company's defense is that wasn't us, it was our AI that did it. And how that plays out within the legal process will undoubtedly give rise to legislation. Because I mean, I know one of the people we deal with, he's in the civil service, and he was explaining to us the other day about the new legislation they're bringing out with relation to to AI and things like that, and it's already 5 years behind.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing we have to be careful of is that there's lots of media coverage around it, but I'm very conscious of the fact is that that media, again, good or bad, sensationalizes, and so you get extremities of the cases. But you know, we're treating it very seriously internally, and that it's an opportunity versus a threat, and I don't think it's gonna create any job losses. My own personal belief, I think what it's going to do is actually accelerate some of our developments, and so that's where I see is that we should be focusing our efforts. However, what we want to do is understand the impact before we go bowling straight into it, and it's as an irresponsible supplier, and just say, yeah, great, we've adopted it and roll it out, before we fully understand the ramifications of the goods and the bads around it. So for us, I think that it's going to be a great opportunity for us, but we need to make sure that we understand it first.
Yes, and I think that from the general market perspective within the business, and especially the tech sector at the moment, I don't think many people really do understand it. And actually, there's an argument going on at the moment that I was seeing about whether or not AI is actually AI, and instead of just being very advanced algorithms, and therefore just reproducing the inputs that go in. Although there have been, I was talking to someone yesterday, and they were mentioning about how some AIs produce what they're calling hallucinations. Where they'll produce an output that they don't understand where it got the original information from. So to that sense, that's where I think that, as you say, there's an element of risk there that needs to be watched, to be understood before you can make large scale decisions.
And that's my job, right? So that I'm not deep enough into the technology to understand it. So I have advisors within my group that are looking into it across our brands, and that we're busy collating information on user cases, goods, bads, indifference. My job, to pick up your word there, is effectively a risk manager for the group. And so that I'm looking at from what are the commercial opportunities and the risk management around it, being advised by the people around me who are far better educated than I am in terms of the technology, who can advise me where we should go with it. And so that's kind of my role in it.
Yeah. So on that, actually, it leads on to an interesting point, because obviously we've spoken a few times before, and you yourself have got a fairly interesting story about how you got to where you are. So please, although I've heard it before, please do refurnish everyone with that, because everyone who's going to listen and watch this is going to find that quite interesting. I'd love to hear that again.
Yeah. So it's just a high level story, happy to share. So I left school at 16. I went to a very good school, but I wasn't an academic, and so that I left with minimum qualifications, English, maths, and other artistic qualifications, really. So woodwork and art and those types of things. And I actually went on work experience when I was 16. They offered me an apprenticeship, and so that I left school at 16 and went and did an apprenticeship, and so that I ended up being a professional model maker. I made models for Tomorrow's World on TV as part of my background. And then as I grew older, I wanted to do the same as everybody else, that I wanted to earn perhaps a higher wage, and that I fell into sales in my early 20s. And then for the next 5 years, I honed my skills in sales. Had my first sales directorship at 25, had my full directorship at 28. And like most people who are in sales, I got into sales by accident. I never went for careers advisor at school and said, I want to be a salesman. Yeah, it's a shortcut to becoming financially independent if you work hard at it. And then I ended up working for an organization who got acquired by Jonas. And when we were acquired, is that I was part of a group. I went with that group because that Jonas didn't have much of a track record in the UK then. I updated my CV, expected to have the IP from me drained over the next 3 to 4 months, and then just say, okay, thanks, Darrell, we're going to put our own man in there. But here I am 13, 14 years later. I run an estate that's $100 million turnover across several countries with 24 brands and 600 plus employees. And so that's just a very high level background is that
it's interesting what you say about the sort of sales side of things. I was in sales in my sort of early days of my career as well, and marketing was the other sort of area that I was into, and it's interesting what you say that nobody goes for that job, and I don't think anybody goes through school thinking they're going to be a salesman. I don't think anybody
and it's something
that.
I did. I was the master sales trainer for a couple of years, because we worked out I was probably the most classically trained salesperson in Jonas in the UK for a little while. So that I was at 2 or 3 years as a master sales trainer. And everybody I come across, I start my pitch by just saying is that how many actually designed to be in sales. Nobody puts their hands up, because everybody in sales is there by accident. But when you look around yourself, right, so that these pictures on the wall, that wallpaper, this screen, I'm talking everything that you touch and see in everyday life has a sales process behind it. So that, and it's quite interesting for me, is that it's quite a leveler. If you've got classic sales skills and that you understand how you're a success and how you're a failure, I think they're very transferable skills. So that, it's served me in good stead all through my life.
Yes, it definitely teaches you, I think, a couple of major things that help in business, and top of that list, I think, is people skills. You learn how to deal with people, you learn how to read someone, you learn how to respond to questions, and how to listen to what someone's actually saying to you and respond back to it, and touch the buttons that they're indicating, and so on. I think that's where it definitely gives a lot of benefit, and I think a lot of very successful entrepreneurs do come from a sales background for that reason. Is that they're used to working out what the person they're dealing with actually wants and finding a way to deliver that solution, and so I do think there's that in it as well.
And the other thing I'd say goes to sales, and one of my traits is I'm constantly inquisitive about things, and so I think if you have a natural interest to understand how things work, how they break, how to put them together, how to take them apart, is that, and also taking an interest in people, but just having that inquisitive nature, I think that can get you a very long way, because you learn very quickly. And I'm never too proud to sit in a meeting, whether it's a key customer meeting, which I go to from time to time, or acquisitions, whatever I'm doing. If I'm in a meeting, I will stop the meeting. If somebody says to me, I don't understand, I'm going to go, that's great. Can you just elaborate on that and educate me? Because I don't have an understanding of that terminology or language you're using, but if you educate me, then we can have a better conversation. And I'm quite happy to be vulnerable in those situations, to say to people is that I don't know everything, I know a few things, but every day is an education. So just educate me. It's a school day.
That's exactly it. I think as well, people who pretend they do understand what someone's talking about when they don't, very quickly get found out. I think it becomes quite obvious when you're talking to someone, or when you're in a conversation and there's something going on and you can tell that the other person doesn't really know what you're talking about, and but they're trying to keep up.
And I'm very conscious of the fact is in everyday life, I meet far smarter people than me. I've just had the philosophy is that people can educate me, the things I don't know about. Work hard every day, and you only get out what you put in. So that's kind of like my philosophy. But I come across people in every walk of life every day that are far smarter than me. I'm going to go, great. If some of that rubs over for me, then so be it.
Exactly. So what sort of advice would you give to someone who's in the sort of early days of their business? If they're in an early startup phase of their business and they're looking to build it to a point where it can achieve an acquisition, what sort of advice would you give them? What's the key things that they need to know, the key things for them to understand, and the main things for them to keep at the forefront of their mind in order to achieve that outcome?
And are these specifically to startups? So people that started their career
To some degree, yes, but it's more anybody who's within that early stage. Really, is obviously, because obviously, as you know, we deal with mostly startups, stage businesses. So I am trying to relate it to the people who I know will be paying attention to this, who are in that sort of space. But I mean, anybody who's in that early stage of business who's got the ambition to grow it to an acquisition point, what sort of advice would you give to someone like that?
Okay, well, there's several component parts there. So that there's a philosophy we have internally, which is trust the data. And so that we don't make decisions internally within the organization I belong to without empirical validation. It's a very rare occurrence where there's a decision gets made and you can't research some data, validate some data, find trends that can substantiate the decision you want to make. So that's the first thing. So that gut feel is a great thing, but I think that gut feel comes from experience as well, right? So what you've experienced, and so that as you're starting on a journey, is that gut feel won't always serve you for best purposes. So just make sure you can validate that with empirical data that can back up your sense. The other things I'll say is that don't be in too big of a rush to get somewhere, and make sure that you, and it's a bit of a corny phrase, but if you look after the pennies, a pound look after themselves. So as an example, that I did a bit of a non-exec work for somebody who owned an outlet, and one of his things he used to do, he used to have a coffee machine with these little pods that went in them, and that and I worked out over the course of a year, because his staff used to use those as well, it's cost him almost £1,000 a year. And I just said,
in coffee.
That's my world. Why don't you just get a big jar of instant coffee and save yourself £900 a year? So sometimes when you look at the little things can actually add up to the big things.
Yeah.
So it's just making sure that you're aware of those little things around you. And then the other thing that I have is that is some people over engineer processes. So I will ask for something, and the analogy I use is I want to get to the riverbank from this side to that side as quickly as possible. And what I want them to do is actually strap a few logs together with some rope and get me across. And if there's a bit of water splashing about, I've got shoes on, my feet won't get too wet. But I see time and time again, when somebody asks, I want to get from this riverbank to that one, is that they need to go away and develop a bridge or something, and they over-engineer processes. And I just say, just listen to the request and look at the task in hand, and how quickly can you get from this riverbank to that one without over-engineering the process.
So I encounter that a fair amount in the startup world, especially. You get people on both sides of that equation. You get people who are just build rafts for everything, even if they're what they're on is the edge of the Pacific Ocean and they're planning to cross to the other side. And we'll just trap some logs together and start rowing, and off we go. And then you got the other people who they'll come across a stream and decide to try to build a suspension bridge over it. And so I think there's probably a happy medium somewhere in there with regard to the best way.
And if we go back and relate that to the tech businesses doing the software, is that I see this time and time again where there's a new product being developed. But what happens is that we go, okay, it's a great idea. We've tested that hypotheses of where it's going to go and penetration rates back to customers. But then we tend to build a product that fits 100% of the customer base. Whereas I'd much rather say, okay, let's get speed to market. Let's build a minimal viable an MVP, a minimal viable product that can perhaps only serve 15% of the customer base. Because even if you developed a product that fits 100%, you're never going to be able to sell that in a short period of time anyway. So why not build the MVP that fits 15%? Then as you start to get revenues and speed to market, and you get the early opinion leaders rather than early adopters, I like to call them early opinion leaders on that product, then you get the funding in to then start to develop the product, and you can then hit 30%, 50%, 70% of your market. And so that's the other analogy I use.
Kind of grow it out as you go, rather than trying to be all things to all people, effectively.
Absolutely, yeah. Don't try to please all the people all the time, because you'll never please all the people all the time. So start with an MVP and just actually work your way through that.
And I'm certain many businesses, and especially in the startup world, have fallen into the trap of trying to be everything to everyone, and as you say, either completely kind of over engineer what they're trying to do, or find that it's actually impossible for them to build the full city of Rome before they've done anything at all. And so I think there's definitely some lessons in there about growth, which is about trying to be more pragmatic, I suppose, is the term that we're
and I see it time and time again, especially in startups, because that they're very keen to please the market and they want to get traction. They'll develop a product which is their core. Then somebody will come along, perhaps it's the third or fourth customer, and go, oh, if only you could tweak it to do this. Then they run off and go, we're going to get money, let's tweak it to do that. And all of a sudden you get this core product that the edges then start to get blurred, because you say, actually, what is it, the core product? Because you end up with those bolt-on component parts, and it actually becomes a mismatch of a solution.
Yes.
So I'd much rather somebody said, actually, it's brave or sensible sometimes to say to customers, great, I hear what you're saying, is it would be good if that product has that, but that's going to be 2 years down the road when I get there. So I'm building out my core solution. Let's keep in contact, let's build it. Why don't we put this in? And actually, we can work with you over a period of time as our roadmap develops for you to have input into it, rather than them running off, building it, and going back and going, haha, we've got it. So that's,
there we go. Now we can sell it to you, and now, but no one else wants that thing that you want. So,
absolutely,
yeah, exactly. I mean, that leads on to a point of sort of like the more kind of collaboration sort of models and things like that, because a good example of that, for example, is say WordPress, for sake of argument, the sort of website platform. Their core product is the WordPress platform itself, but what they've allowed is individual developers to build the plugins that do the little thing that does this and do the little thing that does that, and then you can then build things onto it. Is that a model that you would encourage people that you work with to adopt over and above trying to please everyone, or would it be a
it depends on the sector, because that we have some solutions that are quite heavyweight and that are big ERP solutions to put in, whereas I'm a fan of actually working with customers to make tailored solutions because of the size of the implementations, and then we get longevity with the customer, and actually we get to know more about their business. But one of the things I try to educate my guys on is that I would much rather that you went and understood the 5-year business plan with your key accounts and how does our solution fit into their accounts and move that forwards. I think that if you're looking at a solution where you've got SDK kits, or that you've got APIs and you're trying to be the jack of all trades, some people are doing an amazing job of it. Salesforce is the one example, right, doing an incredible job of it. But I think you have to set out with a strategy to formulate that as part of your go forward and longevity in your strategy. I think if you happen on that strategy by accident, I think you can get out of control. So I think you have to design it that way.
Yes, it's almost like not having a set direction and ending up with a very wiggly road that you end up sort of going down with as you try to chase everything. It's the best analogy of that I've heard before is if you look at a falcon going into trying to catch a pigeon in the flock of pigeons. It doesn't fly in and start chasing the nearest pigeon every single time. It picks one out and goes for it, and that's kind of the only way to do it. Because if it flew into the middle and just tried to start chasing all the pigeons, it wouldn't catch a single one. And that's and I suppose that's a good way to kind of analogize that.
Yeah, and I think that there's a line from a book. I think it's Great by Choice by Jim Collins, and there's a line in there. It says, "Fire bullets, and when a bullet hits, fire a cannonball," which I think is a great line.
Yes, yeah. Once you've kind of struck the right place, then you can go bigger on that down that line. Yes, exactly. It's an interesting space, because there's, especially within startups, and I think it's the same with every business. No matter how long the business has been running, there's always the temptation to chase the new opportunity, especially if you're someone who is an opportunist by nature. If you're someone who's naturally opportunistic, someone who naturally is kind of salesy in that sort of way, oh, that's a new thing, that's something we could make work. How do you make sure that you temper that within your organization, and how do you make sure others do?
And so again, it comes back to full circle. We said about trusting the data and doing the research work. But I often wonder is that when, especially at startups, when they're chasing opportunity, what are they really chasing? What they're really chasing is funds, the cash flow of the business in most instances. And so the thing that we have a lot of internally is discipline. So that and there's an analogy called CAST as well, consistent application of solid techniques. And so that the repetition of reporting on things and actually keeping the discipline. And if you have a strategy where your discipline say, okay, this is the core, and actually we're going to say no to that customer over there because it's going to derail us in the strategy. It's having that discipline and strength actually to say, no, this is the what we've built, this is where we're going, and this is what we're projected to do. But if you get curveball thrown in, that can quite easily derail you. And we all get instances when the customer shouts the loudest, gets served, and that's when I have to relay through my direct reports and my businesses to say, no, let's keep on our disciplined approach, because this is the path where we've designed to go along. And so it's just keeping that discipline and actually having that strength of character to say, no, this is what we're doing and this is where we're going.
It's almost like the clarity of vision that's required behind it, I suppose, is it, isn't it? So as you've got that and you've got to keep that as part of what you're doing, then it makes it less likely that you're just going to chase every new opportunity that comes up. And actually, you talking about you touched on an interesting point there about what they're chasing really is funds. They're chasing revenue. They're chasing the money coming in. It's part of the reason we do what we do within trying to help those startups raise early stage capital, because by raising an early stage capital and making sure they've got money in the bank and they are kind of sorted from that perspective, it allows them to make strategic decisions as opposed to necessary decisions. Moves them from necessity to strategy, because it's very easy in a small company, and especially in a small startup that's literally just getting off the ground, to chase every opportunity you get for revenue so you can bring it in and kind of throw it into the coffers and try to keep going. And so what would you, if you had to sort of pick a particular thing that would make that you would tell anyone who you would say you'd been into a fictional business, you'd looked at them, you decided you weren't going to go ahead with the acquisition, and the reason for that was because they didn't have that kind of clarity about what they were doing. Let's just say, for sake of argument, that was it. What advice would you actually give them about how they make sure they keep themselves going in the right direction?
Well, there's two things, and it might be a slight tangent. So the one thing we see time and time again is, if you look at your recurring revenue growing, is that we see that, and I use this word, but it's not always this way, but the mistake that people make is the fact is that you go, okay, Darrell, we grew 10% for the last 3 years consistently on our maintenance line year on year on year. I go, okay, fine, but that's what you fed in top of the funnel. What came out the bottom? And so that if you grew it by 10% on a year-on-year basis, you might have actually grown it by 30%, but you had 20% leaking out the bottom. And I think there's too many organizations who look at the top of the funnel and don't look at the bottom of the funnel, right? So that and that comes back to, are you looking after the customers? Do you know why you're losing the attrition? Who are you losing to? And so that's a key thing, because you have to know your competitor landscape. And if you're losing that amount of attrition out the bottom of your funnel, the chances are is that you're not doing a great job in terms of understanding your competitor landscape. So that's the single key thing I see time and time again, and that competitor landscape plays into many aspects of the health of an organization.
And
then the other thing that talking about the short-term, long-term vision is that we see time and time again is that owners of businesses, because through necessity, that make decisions based off of cash flow for 2, 4, 6 months. Whereas I want to disconnect the cash flow from the P&L, which is what we bring to the party, to say, okay, now we're a buy and hold forever business. if cash wasn't a problem, would you make different decisions? And every time they always say yes.
Yeah.
Say, okay, well, going back to your point where you're getting funding, where people have funds behind them, is that I want people to make decisions for 2, 4, 6 years, not 2, 4, 6 months.
Yeah.
That's quite a transition that people have to go through, especially if they're in their business for 20, 30, 35 years, because their natural instinct is to say, I sell it, invoice it, I've got to get the cash in to pay the employees. Whereas we're saying, okay, well, although you have to stand alone on your own 2 feet, I want, so long as there's enough cash in there and we'll look after that, make decisions for the longer term. So once you start doing that, then my experience is you start to accelerate the growth, because there's more longevity in the business and the employees get behind it and they help you grow it.
Yeah, it's a it reminds me of a certain question I was asked fairly recently in a conversation I was in about that a lot of advice within business growth and it often comes from the sort of the quite famous entrepreneurs and billionaires and so on in the world who will say, you know, don't be afraid to make mistakes and so on. My feedback to that question was, that's good if you've got the luxury of making them, but if you don't have the luxury of being able to make them, how do you get over that initial hump? How do you get from not being in a position where you can make mistakes to being in a position where you can afford to make them? And I think there's almost like a secret formula in there.
I would caveat that is I see people making mistakes, but actually it takes them too long to realize they've made mistakes.
Yeah.
Say, if you fail fast, right? So that and for me is that my direct reports, I say, okay, you make a mistake or have an error, that's a learning experience. If you make the same mistake twice, we have a different conversation, because that means you're not learning and you're not progressing. So I actually like my guys to make mistakes, but I don't like them to make the same mistakes.
Repeatedly keep making the same mistakes. Yeah, it's the old adage of the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It's kind of that, isn't it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And the other thing, regardless of whether you're a well-trodden business, is that you're a very successful, or whether you're a startup, or whether you're several years in, there's one thing I like my businesses to have, which is a sense of urgency. Just maintain that sense of urgency, that the moment you take your foot off the gas and you don't have that sense of urgency, you start to slow down and you get complacent and you get into a lazy thinking process. And so for me, always think about that sense of urgency. Can we run quicker? Can we run quicker? Can we run faster? I read a book called, I think it's called Black Box Thinking, which is a great book.
I've read that.
And there's something they got out there. It said, instead of having post-mortems, have pre-mortems. And so you're just about to go live with a project, roll out a new product, and go, right, stop. Before we do this, let's assume we failed in this. Where have we failed? And actually, I think the book says that within the organization, get somebody who's not emotionally connected to that project to come and sit in and have a view on it. And I love that process because it makes you think about, actually, here's the gap and here's the weaknesses. So you can tighten those up before you go to market or before you roll out that project. Now, I just think it's a great analogy to use, is do pre-mortems rather than post.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that I think in that space, that's again, it's one of those areas that a very small startup team, for example, doesn't always get the opportunity to have, because they don't have that extra people. And that's generally the role we're trying to play with them, is being that outside non-emotional influence in the business to take a look at what they're doing and help them rethink it, help them position it, help them make the best strategic decisions about what they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it.
And that's amazing opportunities that these companies have, if you're fulfilling that role, is that they should grasp that with both hands and take advantage of that, because especially that not only the fact that you're not emotionally involved in the business, perhaps financially involved, but also is that you have a broader experience because of your helicopter view across lots of different sectors and verticals, and that a number of those transpose into different verticals, and so they should grasp that at both hands, because I think that's an amazing opportunity if they're not taking advantage of that.
Yeah, so I think what we find is that there's not enough people that know that kind of support is out there. I think that's the challenge that's in there a lot of the time for us anyway, is making sure there's enough people who run startups who actually know that solutions like ourselves, for example, exist. And I'm not necessarily sort of pushing us here from a marketing perspective. It's more to simply say that there's a few things out there that fall into the sort of accelerators and incubators kind of space. I don't particularly like those because their business model is just about churn over of startups.
Yeah.
Ours tends to be more hand-on and more kind of partnership based in terms of taking them in the direction we want them to go. So that's where I feel we've got a bit of a difference in terms of how we approach things. And it's been a really interesting kind of journey so far, and yeah, it's definitely continuing in the right direction. Final thing for you, Darrell, because we have managed to get through to the end of our hour here. Thank you very much for taking this time. Last question for you is, if you had to give one single piece of advice to a startup founder in terms of how they build a business, a sustainable long-term business that could be a forever purchase, effectively.
Yeah.
What would you say that is the single main thing for them to keep their eye on?
I think that, am I allowed two?
You can give two. I'll let you have two. Go on.
Right. Okay. So the first thing is that make sure that you have people around you who are talented but share the same mindset you do, because if you've just got employees, is that trying to drag them along is hard work. But if you get somebody in, or a group of people who are enthusiastic as you are, it makes the job so much easier. So that's the first thing. So that keep an eye on that. And the second thing I would say is that, and it's a fact of life, if you're in a startup or you're a young organization, chances are you're going to have to sacrifice something, right, as you travel the journey. So that I would get founders or new businesses to think about what is their currency that they're going to trade to sacrifice. Now, are they going to trade hours with their home life? Are they going to trade them taking a smaller wage? Are they going to trade is that they can't go on holidays? Whatever it is, that it's a reality. And I think is that if you go into it with your eyes wide open rather than your eyes wide shut, I'm realizing that this is going to be a hard journey, but I know I'm going to have to sacrifice anything. What is it I'm prepared to sacrifice? What is my currency I'm happy to trade with? And I think being honest with yourself is that's a great thing, which will actually get them to the goal quicker.
I mean, that's a very sound piece of advice, Darrell. That is very, very important, and yeah, it's really great way to end.